All right, today we're doing something really focused. We're going to do a deep, systematic analysis of just a single verse from the Quran. But this verse, wow, it's a gateway to some of the most profound theological questions you can imagine. We're going to explore a scholarly commentary, a tafsir, on verse 52 of Surah Al-A'raf. And we'll be focusing on its incredibly intricate arguments about divine knowledge, mercy, and the actual nature of the afterlife. This is a detailed exegesis, so let's dive right in. So this is it. This is the verse at the very heart of our explainer. It establishes the Quran as more than just a text. It's a book detailed with knowledge. The commentary we're looking at uses this exact foundation, that the scripture is rooted in this divine, all-encompassing knowledge, to unpack some of the most challenging questions of faith. So keep an eye on these three key concepts right here: knowledge, ilm, guidance, huda, and mercy, rahma. They're going to be our guideposts for this whole analysis.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the verse itself, guidance and mercy. Then we'll get into this fascinating duality of tranquility versus agitation. After that, we'll cover the reality of hell and heaven, dive into some really deep theological questions, and then, at the end, we'll pull it all together. Okay, let's start with the core assertion of the verse. The source commentary really hammers this home. God has brought a book that is detailed with knowledge. Now, this isn't just some claim of authority. It's a statement about the very fabric of the revelation. It means that everything inside it is precise, deliberate, totally comprehensive. There's no ambiguity in its core message. It's a complete guide, and it's designed for a very specific purpose, to be guidance and mercy for a people who believe. And just so we're all on the same page, our source is a tafsir. This is a detailed scholarly commentary on this verse. The tradition of tafsir is absolutely central to Islamic scholarship. The goal isn't just to translate the words, it's to uncover all the layers of meaning, the linguistic nuances, the historical context, and the huge theological implications of the text. So what we're exploring here is one of those really rigorous interpretations. All right, on to our first major theme. The commentary builds this incredibly powerful argument around two opposing spiritual states. It suggests that the ultimate outcomes in the Quran, the experience of heaven and hell, they aren't just places. They're defined by this fundamental duality of being, tranquility versus agitation. And this contrast, well, it becomes the key to understanding the entire framework of the afterlife. So check this out. This is the core contrast right here. On one side, you've got sakina. Now, this is more than just feeling calm. It's a deep internal tranquility, a stability, a state of profound rest, and the Quran explicitly ties this to believers. On the other side, you've got iztirab, a state of turmoil, restlessness, just constant internal disturbance. The commentary links this to those who reject God's guidance. You see the difference? One is a divine gift. The other is a direct consequence of your choices. And the commentary grounds this idea directly in the text. This verse from Surah Al-Fat is presented as Exhibit A. Notice the specific word used, anzala, which means sent down. So sakina isn't something believers just achieve on their own through meditation or something. Nope. It is explicitly described as a divine gift, a grace that God himself puts directly into their hearts. This tells us it's a supernatural state, a sign of God's favor, and the source of unshakable faith. Now here's a beautiful connection the commentary makes. It links this spiritual concept to the natural world. The Arabic root for sakina, S-K-N, is the exact same root used in other verses to describe the purpose of the night, so that you may rest in it. The argument is pretty profound. Just as night brings this necessary, deep physical rest to the world, heaven is a state of ultimate spiritual rest and tranquility. It's their natural, eternal state of being. And in direct opposition, the commentary uses the imagery of iztirab, or agitation. The physical analogy it gives is the wind, always in motion, often chaotic, with no real aim. This is a symbol for the state of the inhabitants of hell, a perpetual internal restlessness, a turmoil that never resolves, a complete lack of peace or stability. It's just constant, distressing motion without any purpose, direction, or end in sight. This idea of agitation leads us right into the commentary's next big argument, and it tackles a huge question. Are the Quran's descriptions of hell literal, or are they just metaphorical? The source commentary takes a very, very clear stance on this, arguing against a purely symbolic reading. So the crucial point here is a total rejection of any interpretation that tries to reduce hell to just a psychological state or some kind of metaphorical warning.
The commentary argues that when the Quran talks about Jahannam, or hell, it's not just using scare tactics. No, it's describing a real, objective, and tangible reality that people will actually see and experience on the Day of Judgment. This verse from Surah At-Takathur is really the cornerstone of this whole argument. The commentary zooms in on two key things here. First, the phrase knowledge of certainty, or ilm al-yaqeen. In Islamic thought, this is the highest level of conviction you can have, based on solid proof. Second, the absolute certainty of the verb la tarawinna. Grammatically, this is a super emphatic form that means you would most surely see. The text isn't saying you would imagine or you would get the idea. It insists on direct visual confirmation. Hell is presented as something you can know with certainty now and something you will see with your own eyes later. The commentary then just systematically piles on the textual evidence to build its case. First, you have the verse that says hell will be brought forth for all to see, which implies a physical thing, something that arrives on the scene of judgment. Second, there's the universal statement that there is not one of you but will pass over it, suggesting a common, tangible location or experience that every single human will encounter. And third, and this might be the most compelling point, is the presence of these detailed, specific dialogues between the people in heaven and hell. This point is so important. The source really emphasizes that the Quran shows people in heaven and hell recognizing each other, a concept called ta'aruf, and then talking to one another, asking questions, having full-on conversations. I mean, that implies a shared space, conscious awareness, memory, social interaction. The argument is, these kinds of detailed depictions are just fundamentally inconsistent with hell being merely some subjective internal state of mind. They point to a literal place of existence. So now that we've established the tangible reality of both reward and consequence, the commentary turns to one of the most central attributes of God, mercy. But it explores this idea not as some blanket, unconditional promise, but as a divine principle that operates with conditions and, with profound justice. And this is the big theological puzzle the commentary sets out to solve. God is described in the Quran as Arham al-Rahimin, right? The absolute peak of mercy, more merciful than anyone or anything that shows mercy, combined. So how could anyone who is subject to that ultimate mercy possibly end up in a state of punishment? Doesn't that sound like a contradiction between God's mercy and his justice? So the source gives this really nuanced, multi-part answer. The short version is no. Someone who truly receives God's ultimate mercy as Arham al-Rahimin cannot go to hell. But, and this is the absolute key, that mercy isn't arbitrary. The commentary makes a critical distinction. It's not for the one described by this specific technical term, Ghafir Mukharib, someone who isn't just a disbeliever out of ignorance, but someone who knows the truth and is actively, willfully at war with it. So a person's own actions and fundamental disposition, that's what determines if they are eligible. The promise of mercy is absolute, but you have to be a worthy and willing recipient of it. Okay, this next section is where we really get into the weeds of the source text. We're going to shift into a more systematic format now, because the commentary addresses several complex theological questions head-on, and it gives these really intricate answers based on careful distinctions within the Quran's own language. Here we go, the classic question of divine foreknowledge versus human free will. If God, in his infinite, timeless knowledge, already knows who's going to end up in hell, doesn't that mean their fate is already sealed? Are their choices on earth just an illusion if the outcome is already known? The commentary's clarification here all hinges on a vital distinction. It separates God's knowledge, his ilm, from compulsion or jub. Just because God knows an outcome doesn't mean he caused or compelled it. His knowledge is descriptive, not prescriptive. The source points out that the Quran consistently says the people of hell earned their fate because of their own deeds, what their hands have sent forth. So the core theological position is this: while God knows, the individual chooses, and that choice is totally real and has real consequences. Foreknowledge is not predestination. This brings us to another huge topic in theology, the story of Adam. And the question is a deep one, especially when you think about the doctrine of prophetic infallibility, or isma. If prophets are protected from sin so they can faithfully deliver God's message, how could Adam disobey a direct divine command? Did he commit a sin? And if he did, how does that square with his status as a prophet? The entire answer from the commentary rests on this next point. It argues that to really understand Adam's story, you have to recognize that not all of God's commands are the same. The Quran, it says, uses language that points to two distinct types of commands. And if you confuse them, that's what leads to this apparent theological problem.
Okay, now this right here is the key to the whole puzzle. On the left, you've got taklini, or formative commands. Think of these like the laws of physics. They just describe cause and effect that's built into creation, like saying, don't touch fire or you will get burned. The warning is about an automatic consequence. On the right, you have tashri'i, or legislative commands. These are legal and moral laws that define what sin is, like do not steal. The consequence of breaking a formative command is the natural, built-in result of the action. The consequence of breaking a legislative command is a designated sin and potential divine punishment.
So, applying this framework, the commentary argues that the command, do not approach this tree, was formative. It was a divine advisory, a warning about a natural consequence, not a legislative law defining a sin. So Adam's action wasn't a sin in that legal tashri'i sense. The result, being removed from that state of being in the garden, was just the built-in natural consequence of approaching the tree. The command to descend wasn't a punishment, it was just a formative statement describing the new reality their choice created. And this just elegantly solves the whole issue. It explains how Adam, as a prophet, could do this, face the consequence, and still receive words of repentance and be forgiven, all without contradicting his protected status.
So, after that incredibly detailed analysis, what are the big takeaways? I mean, the commentary on this one single verse has given us this powerful set of analytical tools for understanding the Quranic text on a much, much deeper level. Okay, let's break it down. First, we've seen that the text is multi-layered. It really demands careful analysis. Second, the commentary puts huge importance on these internal spiritual states, sakina and zdirab, as the core reality of the afterlife, beyond just physical stuff. Third, it shows that divine attributes like mercy and justice aren't just random. They follow clear, consistent principles laid out in the text. And finally, and this is probably the most critical point, we learned that making these precise distinctions, like between formative and legislative speech, can actually unlock solutions to what seem like impossible theological problems.
And this really leaves us with a final question to think about. If we adopt this analytical approach from the commentary, if we really pay a close attention to the categories of divine speech and the nuances in the language, how does it change the way we understand everything? How does it reshape our view of sin, of divine mercy, of justice, of God's interaction with humanity? What the source suggests is that within the very structure and precision of the language itself lies the key to a much deeper, more coherent, and, honestly, a more intellectually satisfying understanding of faith.